So you might be wondering how you can fight human trafficking in your community, and I have two suggestions. So the first we talked about earlier. There are a lot of kids, young teenagers, young adults who are at risk because they come from abusive family situations, and I always say that in order to fight trafficking, we need to make victims less vulnerable. So if you have any opportunities to fight child abuse, to fight sexual abuse, fight child homelessness, volunteer at these shelters, encourage parents to be more present and not, be so neglectful of their children. And these are in more extreme situations or circumstances. If there are organizations that help fight child abuse on any level, I think you are fighting human trafficking, because it's less likely that victim is going to become vulnerable. These traffickers are experts at sniffing out weaknesses and vulnerabilities in victims. So if that victim is missing a father figure, the trafficker will be that father figure. If that victim needs to make money to help support his or her family, that trafficker will use money as a tool for control. So let's help these young people be less vulnerable to traffickers by supporting them and giving them what they may be lacking so that traffickers don't fill that role. Another way that you can help fight trafficking is by looking out for the red flags. If you see a classmate or a coworker who and none of these flags on their own are dispositive, but they might be signs. Victims are sometimes branded with their trafficker's name or moniker, or like a nickname. If you know that they don't have a job and all of a sudden are coming with very expensive clothing or bags or shoes, that may be a sign. If they seem they're tired and like they're up all night when they come to school, oftentimes victims are trafficked at nighttime if they are being commercially sexually exploited. These are things just to look out for. There might be some suspicious circumstances that you might see at a restaurant or at a hotel or motel. If in doubt, call the police, call our task force, and we're always there to help.
So are there already existing groups who work on this issue? Yes, many, and it would be important to look into this through the internet. One of them in this Bay Area is the Bay Area Traffic Against Trafficking. In the South Bay Area, there's a South Bay Coalition. But all of these organizations have come together under one umbrella called No Traffic Ahead. And it is an organization of coalition of over 50 agencies who work against this issue. And so you just have to go to the internet and look up No Traffic Ahead.
I think one of the best ways that law enforcement and policymakers can help is to begin themselves to go through some sort of training of what trafficking is, and to begin to change the culture of like the police force. Like I mentioned before, the San Jose police force has done such a good job of treating people not as the criminal, but as victims, and having women from social agencies be with them to when they're being processed, so that the person doesn't continue to feel that they are criminalized for something that they did not intend to do, so that the person realizes that they are a survivor and that they are a victim.
Well, from my experience as a member of the Catholic Network to End Human Trafficking and as a Sister of Charity of the Blessed Virgin Mary, we have taken a strong stance about education about this issue. Probably it is the most important part of ending human trafficking is to educate many people. What I have done in the past is been giving presentations to various church groups, parish groups, young people, 7th and 8th graders, anyone who does need to know about this issue and how to solve it. I have been especially inspired by high school students who have taken this issue to heart and do research on legislation, who create videos and documentaries and all kinds of social media to reach young people because they are credible to young people. And so I am both amazed and pleased at my connection with young people who are doing education. We work together to help bring about new knowledge and new information to many groups of people.
The local leaders play a big role in the community, a role of empowering the people, a role of bringing the people together. So the local communities should play a role that if someone has been harmed or being trafficked, to help out and stop the vice. Unfortunately, what happens, we tend to be secretive of our family issues. We are not the Africa, we are not the Uganda that you were before, when the problem at a neighbor's place was a problem at my own home. So such issues come in and it is a secret to the family. So this family have their son, their daughter taken out by the traffickers and it is not mentioned anywhere. So the community should be vigilant enough to understand where so and so's daughter, so and so's son is working or is residing. So we should have a communal way of tackling the issue. When you come to law enforcement and policies, the government policy on human trafficking is very good. However, it has not been implemented to the full. We have so many companies that have been given license to advertise and take Ugandans out of the country for better jobs. However, whatever happens to them when they cross the country is nobody's business. Nobody comes up to follow up on where they were taken. So the government should really come up through the Interpol to follow up on where all the Ugandans are working, all that have been trafficked to be brought back home, and also to create a center for rehabilitation of the victims because they have been traumatized, they have been sexually abused, they have been physically abused, and some actually have everlasting ailments. So we should have a center where they can be rehabilitated and later on brought back to the community. The government is to continue strengthening education. We have the universal primary and the universal secondary education. This is a compulsory education. The more we have our children into the schools, the more we will have them away from such vices as human trafficking. So I would appeal that the government enforces its policies. The policymakers, the parliamentarians, all should come up. We should all come up and have human trafficking kicked out of Uganda.
If you want to donate your time or actual supplies, many shelters and many social agencies that work with survivors need all kinds of equipment, clothing, gift cards, any kind of way to help a person move forward in their life. You can also donate your time. For instance, if you are a doctor, a lawyer, a dentist, you can pro bono work on causes because many of the survivors, victims, also need expertise in those areas.
The first step in ending trafficking is for everyone to be aware of what it is so that they can choose where they can best intervene. It is critically important for what we call frontline individuals to be aware of it. Those are people who are in the education system, in law enforcement, in prosecution, the judicial system, legislators, to fully understand the complexities, the issues, that they understand the impact of the laws and the decisions that they are making in the judicial system. Then, as individuals in society, we can get involved by, one, openly discussing the kind of cultural norms that enable this type of situation, whether that be the kind of acceptance of prostitution in our countries, or the drive for lower and lower costs of our goods that force manufacturers or incentivize manufacturers to make poor decisions and keep their supply chains clean. And once we are aware of what those factors are, getting involved at a community level to raise awareness and take action where we can. I think it's also important to support survivors of trafficking because, again, trafficking preys on the most vulnerable, and oftentimes the most vulnerable are those who have already come out of trafficking situations. So it's a pretty vicious cycle. And
both domestically and internationally, that are doing great work on the front lines of this issue.
So what may adults do and community people do on the issue of human trafficking? Well, again, we can influence our legislators, both on the state level, the city level, the state level, and on the national level. We can sign petitions. We can contact our congresspersons. We can use our community power, even at a local level, to pass resolutions on a city level that will say no traffic of persons can happen in this city. So we can use our voice and our power of vote to influence human trafficking.
One of the things, like I said previously, I got involved with this because of the corporate stance of our religious institute on human trafficking, and also my dedication to creating a more just world, even in a very small way. So one of the things I do is I administer a website for the Bay Area Conference of Associates of Religious, and we have a section on the website that deals with social justice issues, and one of the big ones for our religious institutes here in the Bay Area is that of human trafficking. So there are lots of resources that I put on there about human trafficking. So that's one way that I feel that I'm helping to educate people, because education is the biggest way of helping to change the culture. So many people are completely unaware of human trafficking. Recently I met somebody that I know is very much involved in helping other people and trying to make life better for them. And yet when I started talking about trafficking, the person thought that it was only international. She had no clue that it was happening here. So we began to talk about restaurants where she goes and has dinner, and as she checked out to see, who is working there, are they getting a fair wage, nail salons, massage parlors, all of these places where people go, are they at all engaging the workers and looking at the signs for trafficking and trying to see if, maybe this place people are being trafficked. So I think even in casual conversations we can bring up trafficking, and that is one way of beginning to combat this.
And again, how can we contribute both our talents and our finances to ending this issue of human trafficking? Well, we can support locally and nationally those agencies, domestic violence shelters, community solution shelters, those shelters and organizations that help survivors find a new life. We can also just use, for instance, the money that we spend on one meal, one dinner for one person, anywhere from $20 to $40. We can use that to help a group like Garments USA, which provides backpacks and clothes and other resources for victims of survivors. So we can again use our pocketbook to end human trafficking.
Well, Challenging Heights has a holistic approach to ending trafficking. And by doing so, we have a triple R process, which includes rescue, recovery, and reintegration. And also we do community sensitization, coupled with other programs such as the Youth Empowerment Program and a livelihood program for the women that are unempowered. And that livelihood program is basically called the Women Economic Empowerment Program. And we also promote the realization for every child's right to education. And we also have an advocacy setting whereby we talk about human trafficking locally, nationally, and internationally to bring up awareness and fight trafficking as a whole.
One of the convenient ways of reporting human trafficking situations where a person determines that there is suspicion is the Red Light app, which is available on Android, and also the Stop app it's called, and that's available on both Android and iOS systems.
This is one of the very difficult things about human trafficking, is the fact that we tend to blame the person who is being trafficked, and yet it is not their fault. So we need to begin to reverse our thinking on this. it's really great to know that like the San Jose Police Department has gone through great efforts, and now when they do arrest someone who is either a prostitute or in a restaurant and is being held for very low wages and maybe undocumented, they do not treat the person as the criminal, but as the victim, and they try to get social services to come and help them. And they also realize that the person may not be ready to let go. They have been under scrutiny, have been trafficked by someone for a very long time, and they're not willing to walk away from something that has been very secure. So let us not stigmatize the persons who are involved, but realize that they are victims of the crime.
If money is a major way traffickers operate, then we as consumers can operate against that by asking ourselves questions. Where do we buy our clothes? Where do we buy our appliances? Where do we buy our cars? And we can ask the questions of these organizations. Who is your distributor? Where do you get your goods? And we can then shop with dignity and shop where places are not using child labor or manual labor of human beings and are victims of trafficking. We can also buy fair trade and ask the question, is this a fair trade product? Where does it come from? And use our money wisely.
So how to stop trafficking, or how do I feel that I'm helping with my anti-trafficking efforts? While working for the Office of Women's Policy in Santa Clara County, doing anti-trafficking policy work, it's definitely trying to help survivors on a systems level, which is completely different than running my nonprofit law firm, where I'm providing direct services, legal services to survivors that have been trafficked. So, in between the different roles, I think when you're looking at a system and trying to make change, obviously there's bureaucracy that you have to deal with. But what's important is you know on the ground what's happening. You're able to take those facts, those cases, and make sure that people in the bureaucracy actually know and understand the impact of what's happening. So that's a great challenge for me, dealing with the bureaucracy and the politics of the job itself, but it's very important work, and I applaud everybody doing policy work. It's really important. Again, with a direct service, it's completely different. It's more based on an individual relationship you have with your client, and that for me seems to be the most impactful. That's where I get inspired, is through my clients and working with them and helping them find what they feel is justice. And it's may or may not actually be what the court system actually decides, our legal justice system. You might not actually find true justice for a survivor, for a victim in the courtroom. Justice might look something completely different. And so for me, it's definitely much more rewarding when working with my clients one-on-one. I just find that ability to work with such an amazing individual who's overcome so much. Again, I can't stress enough how inspired I am by my clients and their ability to move forward and to move forward successfully. It's just a delight to be able to work with somebody like that.
So when you see some suspicious behavior, what is it that you can do? Well, the first thing that you can do is report to the Polaris National Hotline. It's 1-888-373-7888. Or you can text Be Free, which is 277-377. These are very successful ways in which to report trafficking. Or you can contact your local police department, which is another number that you can put in your phone, both the hotline number and the text number. What happens to your, this is in the U.S. now, what happens to your call once you've made it? The call then goes to the hotline. They ask you questions. You can remain anonymous. Then they take that information and then they map it to see if other calls have been made from the same area. If there is reason to believe that this is a traffic situation, they will contact the local police authorities, and from there the local police will take care of the incident. By the way, I forget to mention that Polaris is also international, and there is an international hotline number also.
The only way to end trafficking is to address the root cause of trafficking: lack of awareness. Lack of awareness on the vice by the people. So for us at Rideau Junior School, what we are doing, we are trying to empower the children that we reach out to, the youth that we reach out to tell them about this vice. The fact that there are people who are into trade, the modern day slavery. So we are trying to make awareness in all the communities where we have been invited, especially talking to the youth and the women. These are the most vulnerable people. So we are also trying to lobby the government to continue supporting, because the government we have a law against trafficking. Once you're prosecuted and found guilty, you serve either 15 years in prison or life imprisonment, depending on the gravity of how the victim has been found, or depending on the evidence that has been brought before court. So we are trying to urge government, we are trying to urge the local leaders, we are trying to urge all civil society organizations to come up and address the vice. We are also trying to empower women to get self-reliance, because when someone has a little income in the home, then we are trying to push away the vice of trafficking. Otherwise, when they tend to get dependent on their husbands, dependent on their male relatives, then that gives them more chances of being trafficked later on in the future.
What's more important when you get educated about this issue is what do you do with what you know and what you learn. To get trained to help in one of these agencies is very important. Also, I'd like to mention that Stanford University this January, toward the end of the month, is putting out a training course for hotel, restaurant, and the general public. And it will be in small segments, it will be online and free. And so I encourage people to use this to see how they can, first of all, learn more, and how they then can get involved in the local level.
I had mentioned the case in Charlottesville, North Carolina. And one of the things that happened that I was very impressed with is that once this young woman, Joy, had been taken in by the police on a raid in a sex club, the persons who met with her were called Justice Matters, and they're a group of people from a church who make it their business and have volunteers to go with the police to raids such as this, and to sit down with the victim and to try to help that victim during the time that they have been just rescued from their trafficker, their perpetrator. So I think that is one way that one could, find out what it is that your church is doing, find out organizations in your local area, what are they doing about trafficking, and how can you help?
So how can young people help with this issue? First of all, yes, once they are educated, many young people really want to give direct service to survivors or in social agencies, but that is not possible because of their age. Sometimes there are agencies that want to collect items for survivors, and that's another way young people can collect backpacks and toiletries and things to be given to survivors. That's one element. Another element is to also use legislative advocacy, to learn about an issue and to go to places where politicians are making policy around this issue. For instance, going to Sacramento, California, the state capital, and advocating through various laws that are passed, and they need encouragement from young people to their legislators. Also, some young people actually travel to Washington, D.C., and as a result of their advocacy, various legislation has passed. In fact, this past November, there was reauthorization of funding up to 2020 of $39 million for survivors so young people can have an impact that way?
So there are a lot of people who are invested in putting a stop to this crime. The South Bay Coalition to End Human Trafficking, Community Solutions, YWCA, just to name a few nonprofit organizations that have done really good work, grassroots work, bringing volunteers together, putting together trainings and outreach events to educate and do a lot of outreach with respect to trafficking. But the DA's office also too is doing a lot to prevent this crime, to root out this crime. Because not only are we part of the investigative and prosecutorial efforts, but part of my job too is to go out into communities and do outreach and talk to the at-risk communities, particularly with labor trafficking. We're doing a series of Know Your Rights in the Workplace events where we are advising people of what their rights are in the workplace, that they are entitled to fair pay. They're entitled to go into a workplace that is safe, that where they will not suffer any harassment and threats. So we're doing a lot because we know that in order for us to root out more cases, we need to make sure that the community is on our side. And also we're very much a part of developing policies and procedures to ensure that our efforts to fight trafficking are victim-centered, that we're taking into account the trauma that victims experience, that we are taking into account the various challenges that they face. If we take a labor trafficking victim out of an exploitative work situation, the first two things on their minds are likely, will I get deported if they're undocumented, and how will I survive? I may be getting paid less than minimum wage, but it's better than having no job at all. So we make sure that we give them a safety net. We work closely with immigration attorneys and wage and hour attorneys, community-based organizations to help with shelter, filing T and U visas, which are immigration visas that can allow trafficking victims to stay in the United States legally, and help them get employment attorneys so that they can hopefully get some of their wages back. So we work to ensure that all the needs and concerns are addressed, and putting the victim first above anything else.
A very important role. They receive tips all the time. They spend time investigating these tips, and then they carry out what they consider either raids or releasing victims from their issue of trafficking. One of the things that's important to remember is the attitude of most law enforcement now looks upon victim survivors as that, not as criminals. And they often have an advocate right from the very beginning when they do the interviews with someone who has been recently rescued from a trafficking situation. Legislators are also important to involve in understanding this issue, and they use their expertise to continue to advocate through new laws to protect the victim as well as to prosecute the perpetrator.
So, as a young person, there might be some restrictions on what young people can do to help fight trafficking. Youth can't necessarily volunteer at a trafficking shelter or homeless shelter or abuse shelter like adults can. But what young people can do is look out for the signs, take the information that you've learned and help educate other adults, other people in your community, and frankly, just having these conversations and talking about trafficking and that it exists in our community goes a long way in the fight.
Another way young people can create an absolutely wonderful, credible resource is in the area of social media. I've had students work with me with 7th and 8th graders on the perils of social media, on how to use social media to pass on good information, but also how they can protect themselves from the misuse of social media. So that is one area where young people have the expertise, the knowledge, and the connections, and can make a great deal of difference in the lives of other young people.